started thinking about the two worlds that we could potentially live in by Tuesday of next week. World A is the Vikings beat the Seattle Seahawks, and World B is they lose to the Seattle Seahawks.
That's pretty bold.
And I know, well, ties do happen, but I don't think there's a tie in this world that I'm envisioning. So, okay, yes, those are clearly the two possible outcomes. I am aware of that. But I think that a lot of times, if you win a game, if you lose a game, okay, well, you're still in playoff position. You're moving on. All right, no big deal. You can survive that. They lost to Chicago. It didn't change everything about the season and their potential outlook when they lost to Chicago or even Kansas City. They were still right in a way that they could go make the playoffs and so forth. I think the way we feel about the Minnesota Vikings, if they win or if they lose this game, is massively different, is a completely different stratosphere from each other. And if they win it, Murph, I think we're talking about this team has the potential to go deep in the playoffs.
They certainly have the potential to run the table, I think, at that point. And then you're looking at the NFC North. A loss, though, and you're pretty much staring at a wild card, probably the last wild card position, and probably a road game, are you not? Because you still, then it sets up, well, you got Green Bay at home. That's your toughest test. But I think they're going to – I think from a confidence standpoint, I think from a perception standpoint, and again, from a productivity standpoint, again, it's going to all come down to number 8 again, right? We're going to redefine him again by about midnight on Monday.
Yes,
we will be redefining Kirk Cousins for the 10th time this season and making our snap judgments, our long-term judgments, and our what were they thinking judgments, right? Depending on whatever he does and how he performs in another primetime game.
You are absolutely right that we do reevaluate Kirk Cousins after every single game.
And we should. And I don't think that's unfair.
Yes. And this year has been super unique. And this is why Seattle matters so much. Because Kirk Cousins is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL this year.
No denying that.
And normally that would come along with one of the best quarterbacks, but kind of like 12th best. And I've said that many times. And if you were just ranking them by who you'd take for one game, you probably don't put them in your top 5, probably don't put them in your top 7. But just based on pure performance, just the numbers, what Pro Football Focus says, what his quarterback rating says, Pro Football Focus has him right now as 3rd in the NFL.
Overall.
All quarterbacks. The only two better, Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson.
Yes.
Right behind him, Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, Deshaun Watson. And that is a pretty darn good ballpark to be in for Kirk Cousins. And I can understand why people would think this isn't for real. We went through this with Case Keenum just a couple years ago where he had all these great numbers. I think he finished Pro Football Focus like 7th. They were top 10 in scoring. And then when you got to the playoffs, you got exposed. And it would be natural. We're going to talk with Sam Monson for Pro Football Focus about this in about a half an hour. It would be natural to wonder, is it going to be exposed at some point because he isn't the 3rd best quarterback in the NFL? If he beats Seattle, it's not getting exposed. This is their offense, and this is how well their quarterback is playing this year.
The one stat I've been pounding on the last couple of weeks, and this is, I think, both, the traditional statistics, he's in the top field. The Pro Football drill down statistics, he's obviously making a lot of progress and making a name for himself there as an elite quarterback this year. But the one that stands out to me that really defines what has happened with his resurgence, and I think how fans are rethinking and buying in, 18 touchdown passes, 1 interception since the Chicago loss at Soldier Field. And that 1 interception bounced off the face mask of Stephon Diggs into the hand of the defender. So look at that stretch right there. And you can't tell me that that's not clutch play. And that does not convince you that Kirk Cousins is the quarterback that they invested $84 million in prudently. And now, that being said, by midnight on Monday, all of that doesn't matter, right?
Potentially.
Yes.
If they lose, and I want to get to that world in a second, but living in the they win world, more likely than not, that means Cousins played really well. Because Russell Wilson against this defense is going to score some points. I don't think it's going to go like it did last year where the Vikings defense shut down Russell Wilson and then Cousins no-showed. I think this is probably the opposite game. This one could be a shootout, much like what we saw against Dallas when he beats Dak Prescott and he plays really well. Prescott lights up the Vikings defense as quarterbacks have done more often this year than they ever have during Mike Zimmer. but you're probably talking about another couple of touchdowns, probably not picks, probably not fumbles. His ability to reduce the turnovers this year and be so consistent from week to week, aside from a half against Kansas City, aside from a Bears game, a half against Denver. I mean, at that point, it feels like we're nitpicking to say, well, he hasn't been good in this one half or this one quarter or whatever. If we're getting to that point with a quarterback, he's been really, really good. And in the world where he wins, we are talking about his MVP potential. We are talking about this team as having a quarterback this year, not in 2025 or whatever, if it's extended, and not whether this could be sustainable from year to year to year if they lose Stefanski, but only in the bubble of this year, where the notch to me turns up from a lot of people are lukewarm on this team. And I think that that's fair. You're coming off a game where you were down 20 to the Denver Broncos, who last week scored 3 in Buffalo. Like, they're not a good team. They're going to bench Brandon Allen, and that guy put up 23 points on you. Even despite throwing an interception in the end zone. I mean that's not a great sign for you. And there have been other times where it's the no-show sort of look from this team. There are weaknesses that they have. So if you're skeptical, I totally understand that, and I would be in that category as well. A win here takes us sort of the same place that the Vikings took us when they beat Los Angeles at home in 2017, where you were skeptical. Is this Case Keenum thing really going to work? I don't know. You beat the Rams at home in that 24-7 game, and then all of a sudden everybody was all in. Okay, now you're a Super Bowl contender. I would feel the same way about this. I would feel that at least for this year, Kirk Cousins has the magic around him. I don't know how long it will last for his entire career, but he definitely does this year. And I will walk away feeling like, yeah, we need to start putting this team in the Super Bowl contender conversation if they beat Seattle.
And I think overall, the Vikings have a lot to answer for from that debacle last year in Seattle as a club, a club, because they allowed Russell Wilson, granted they played well defensively, but they allowed Russell Wilson to take over the game with his legs, and offensively they were just non-existent. I mean, it got their offensive coordinator fired. John DeFilippo was obviously canned right after that game.
Right.
Cousins didn't show up, didn't make the plays that needed to be made, and that essentially robbed them of their playoff berth. I mean, the loss at home to Chicago, that officially did it, but I think their season died out at CenturyLink Field. So,
yes,
you're not going to, again, pros a year later aren't going to say, well, the revenge factor. I don't view it as revenge. I think it's more atonement. I think you need to go out there and afford yourself well and play against an elite quarterback, an elite team in a very tough environment. If you don't come away with the victory, you don't lose yourself this season, you handicap yourself. But again, how do they perform? How do they answer for that? Because that was a one-sided loss last year, and that essentially ended their season and cost John DeFilippo his job and put more weight on Mike Zimmer's shoulders that he's still carrying right now.
And at that point, I think I would have told you this Cousins thing is not going to work.
Yes.
At that
people
point,
were saying that.
He turned around and threw a ball backwards to Latavius Murray, overhand, which I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback ever do before. When Adam Thielen was wide open, he was so shook in that game.
Well, he was pounded pretty good that game too.
He was hit hard. They didn't run the ball very well, I believe. But from the very start, you went, oh no, it's a Monday Night Football game. Here's Kirk doing that Kirk thing again against Russell Wilson. Even when Wilson's not playing well, like you mentioned, he found a way to win the game, which is the issue that they've had with Cousins so many times, is that he just doesn't find a way to win the game. And that's where he can shift the entire feeling about him. Because if you're a Vikings fan who's still skeptical on Cousins, I can totally understand that. And I wouldn't even disagree with that at this moment. But if he can beat Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson in the same season
on the road
in a short stretch, on the road, both of those games, then you have to start saying, I don't care about the big picture here with Cousins. Of course, you would take Russell Wilson 1,000 times out of 1,000 for the next 5 years over Kirk Cousins. But in the small picture, with this offense, with this offensive coordinator, with Dalvin Cook playing the way he's playing, with Adam Thielen potentially coming back, we'll see. Not practicing today, which is concerning. But with all the weapons they have, Irv Smith has stepped up, that this version of Cousins can do these things that we've said he's never capable of doing. Now, the other world is they lose. And I think once they lose, what comes into your mind is, Well, you really only beat Dallas because they ran twice senselessly at the end of the game and hurt themselves and didn't score. You only really beat Denver because the guy didn't get in the end zone from the 1 yard line. And, well, Kirk has all these great stats, but that looks like the same Kirk to me. I can't think of another game, Murph, that has such a wide gap between how everyone would feel about a team. If they go out there and no show, do what they did last year and come up short and lose, I think we're even going to say, well, this offensive coordinator can only do so much for the quarterback. It does kind of rest on him, but it probably also means that Zimmer's defense gets lit up again.
That's where I was going to head next. That defense has been so suspect and so soft on the back end this season. They are going to go out there and get tested again, and it should be concerning. I didn't see the official injury report today. Did Harrison Smith practice?
They have not put it out yet, but Harrison Smith and Anthony Harris appear to both be limited, so their chances are decent.
Linval Joseph?
Joseph was practicing.
Okay, so they're getting chipping away at it a little bit.
Yep.
But again, we're talking a hamstring with Harrison Smith,
who
does nothing but rove back there. That bears watching all week long. Yes, that to me, we're always going to scrutinize and follow and harp on Cousins, but defensively, they've got to find a way to stop Russell Wilson, both running it down their throat as he did last year with a couple of huge, big-time plays.
Yep.
He also threw an awful interception at one point, too, but he found ways to pull the ball down as he does and make plays when it needed to happen and win a game. I mean, he won the game for the Seattle Seahawks by coming up with big plays on a Mike Zimmer defense that last year was statistically much better than the one that they're putting out there this year, and the one that you can almost see melting a bit before your eyes. I mean, Xavier Rhodes, we talk about him every week. He's now targeted. Mike Hughes, granted he's a year behind in his development, and he's shown flashes, but Dallas picked on him. Denver picked on him. I think Seattle's going to be picking on him until he can find a way to demonstrate he's able to defend up to par.
So under the category of what if they lose, you're probably walking out of that game saying, I'm sorry, you just can't do it in the playoffs. Defensively even. Because we'll say that about Kirk, even if he plays fairly well. Well, you lost another game in primetime, but it's also probably going to be the conversation of look who you're going to play in the playoffs. Look who the other quarterbacks are.
You're going to be on the road.
Right. Drew Brees is one of the best of all time. Wilson is an MVP potential this year. Rodgers may be washed, but he's still good. And then Dak Prescott, another guy who's playing like an MVP and already almost threw for 400 yards against you. How are you going to beat several of those guys to get to the Super Bowl? It won't seem possible if Wilson lights them up.
I could see them maybe. Now, Garoppolo in San Francisco, you keep giving up on them, and then all they do is just keep kind of getting better and coming back and stacking up more wins. I still don't view Levi Stadium is the most formidable place to play. Sure. I think, because your weather's probably not going to come into play. It's not that intimidating, at least not yet. Granted, the Vikings did well in Dallas, but you don't want to be going to Lambeau in January. You don't want to be going back out to Seattle, and you don't want to be going to the Superdome at any time. So you are putting yourself in danger of having an awful path to get to where you want to be with a loss.
And you just don't see it very often that teams can go all the way through after starting out as the wild card or on the road. I think the Giants did it, and they might have been the last team to do it. I know that
the Jags got to the title game.
So the Rams ended up winning in the Superdome, got a little help from the referees last year. But aside from that, most of the time it's somebody who gets home field. And if you're the Vikings, that's why these final 5 games are so important, and especially this one, because it's a huge swing for where you could end up playing. And I've been toying around with the playoff machine here and trying to figure out different scenarios where the Vikings, like what the best situation they could be in. And if you can't get to the 2 seed, which is possible because New Orleans has a really tough schedule and so does San Francisco. But if you can't get to the number 1 or 2 seed, you could definitely be number 5 and be going to Dallas to play them again there, which with their head coach, I think you'd feel pretty good about. But if you don't win this one, you're kind of locked into that 6th seed, which means more likely than not, you're going to play Green Bay on the road. That's not something you love. I mean, it's doable, but it isn't something you love. And then if Green Bay plays well, New Orleans slides back, you're talking about going there. I mean, it has a huge swing in many ways, but I think the biggest is just how you would feel about them.
Well, and if they win, the schedule that they have in the regular season is all downhill. I mean, you've got Detroit and Chicago at home. You have Green Bay, which will be tough, but then you're going out to LA to play the Chargers. I mean, it's not exactly, this is the end of that gauntlet that they've been walking through since Kansas City, right?
Yep.
So if you can get out of that with victories at at Dallas and at Seattle, you escape Denver at home, you take 3 out of 4 from, the death march, so to speak, and you come out, you've got Detroit, which is mailing it in. You've got Green Bay at home, which, rivalry game. It's tough to win or tough. It'll be tough for Green Bay to come in here with any kind of edge in that game. And then you're wrapping up against Chicago, which I don't know what the stakes will be in that game at that point. I mean, the seedings may already be determined. But then again, you're looking at avenging an ugly week 4 loss that could have really defined your season, and avenging last year's week 17 loss that ended it.
Yeah. And so I guess if you were looking for a positive of potentially losing to Seattle, the only one would be that you're probably going to end up locked into the 6th seed at that point. And so when you get to week 17, you could rest people. But that's really not the silver lining you're looking for. You're looking for a bye week in the first round of the playoffs. If you accomplish that, you've got a great chance of going to the Super Bowl. If you win the NFC North, you get a home playoff game. You've got a great chance of winning a playoff game. And even if our feelings on Cousins change in this team in general about how they can perform against great teams, no one's going to buy Cousins or think that this was a success, no matter what his numbers are, no matter what his PFF grade is, if you lose in the playoffs. It's really that simple with Cousins. And it's unfortunate because it's not fair to anybody to say, we're really going to grade you on just this one game. But when you sign the contract that you sign and take over a team with this level of talent,
you're paid to win these games.
About. And that's why there's still skepticism around Cousins. I mean, you beat Dallas. That was a good win. They're 6-5. It's not the greatest win I've ever seen. This would be the legit win. This would be the signature one, the one where you could look back and say, okay, that's the one that made me believe that they could actually go somewhere. I think Cousins needs it too, because I'm sure that there's the same feeling within the team that there is outside of the team. And even when we were talking to Rick Spielman before the bye week break, it was kind of like, yeah, we're really happy with the way the coaching staff is done, and Kirk's played pretty well. And so there wasn't this like, yeah, he showed all you type of attitude, which the Vikings do not usually ever hesitate to have. But it's a little bit of like cautious optimism on Cousins. That's why he needs this one. I think this is why he needs this one pretty badly, because if he doesn't get it, then it's probably a first round out is where I would put them. So let me ask you another question, because in a few minutes we got Sam Monson coming up. Zimmer talked today about the fundamentals, and yeah, I know, right? Football.
OTAs
so
in December or November.
They get the bye week, and you know what Zimmer was doing. He was in a tree stand somewhere in Kentucky with his iPad, breaking down tape and waiting for deer or something.
Did anybody ask him if he bagged anything?
No. I mean,
yeah,
sort of a weird question. Anyway, so he's been great throughout his career at making adjustments on defense. They get lit up last year by Los Angeles, and then they switch on a dime and all of a sudden have one of the best defenses in the NFL at the end of the year. Now, this year, whatever changes he's tried to make has not really worked with the secondary. They are 17th in quarterback rating against. We've seen even Case Keenum move the ball, Chase Daniels move the ball against them, Matt Moore move the ball against them. Now, if they can't get it fixed, would you put that on Zimmer not being able to work his magic again? Or would you put that simply on, well, these players have faded? Or would you put it on the front office and say, you guys really should have seen this coming?
I put it 75-25. Zimmer owns 75% of it, 25%
really? Okay.
of the players. Well, I think, I don't think they could have counted. Should they have counted on Xavier Rhodes regressing the way he has? Why? Just because of his age?
No, because of last year. Because he was one of the tops in the NFL in penalties and one of the bottom in the NFL in Pro Football Focus grade last year. And then you add the age in there. If he was 22, you'd say, well, he'll probably bounce back. But he was 28. And with big corners, I looked at this in the offseason, big corners don't always bounce back. Darrelle Revis didn't bounce back. By the time Darrelle Revis was Xavier Rhodes' age, he was starting to fall off the side of the cliff.
Well, I think, but you're right. Zimmer's always found a way to patch it together.
Yeah.
He's found a way to, I think, emotionally and mentally turn players that maybe didn't believe in themselves into believers in themselves that could make plays. I mean, Andrew Zendejo really I never thought had a lot of business being in the NFL. And suddenly he became a serviceable safety under
Yep.
Mike Zimmer, who was able to find a job in Philadelphia, and Zimmer rescued him again, getting him back here.
Yep.
So how does that, there's an example of somebody being transformed into an NFL player by a defensive back coach who was able to take some raw talent, mold him into just a basic role to get production out of him. Trey Waynes, up and down, can look really good at times.
Usually, though, good quarterbacks realize that he can't play the ball, and they just throw it at him anyway.
And then Mike Hughes, again, who's a year behind in his development, has been exposed in the last several weeks as a rookie, essentially a rookie with a rookie plus. You can call it that.
Yeah.
So yes, where, he keeps talking about, when he's asked about this, it's all about technique. We got to teach better technique. We got to have these guys playing better technique. Well, that's coaching. Are they not listening? Are they not able to do it anymore right now? We've seen several instances of him being on the sideline, ranting and ranting against his secondary. And I think he takes it personally when they don't play well because this is how Mike Zimmer became an NFL